The freedom of choice is immense. Like, you're gonna have so many options available. You're gonna receive so many opinions about what you should do and how you should do it. But in the end, you are the one who's gonna have to decide for yourself and for the future of your company and the people in your team. Listen to your gut feeling. When it comes from within, it's the right decision, because if you're not listening to that, at some point you're gonna regret it.
Is everything over? Shall we give up on the gaming industry now? Shall we stop trying making games, building studios and companies that have the power to positively impact the future lives of millions of players, professional and humans? No, we don't. In this special track of Rise and Play, I will be focusing on the unspoken topics around building game companies, founders teams, fundraising, pitching, rebouncing after closing your studio company or losing your job, by bringing guests who are going through the same storm of 2024 like you, and keep fighting. I will also share openly my own process, trials and error, and step-by-step building the new game company Killen as the first-time CEO of a game company. I believe we are stronger together, and we don't have to go through the storm alone, because at Rise and Play, we are not alone. Oh, and one last thing, as you feel supercharged by listening to this episode, it will mean a lot to me, and if you haven't done it yet, that you hit the follow button. It will help with the discovery of the show so other people can benefit from the content too. Thanks, and now let's get to the episode. So hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play. Today I continue with my French series actually on looking at a snapshot on the French studios and more independent studios to also give a perspective on what's happening in 2024 for some of the studios that started in 2022, 2021, that were funded in some way or bootstrapped. And those stories are important because especially when money is not flowing freely in 2024, what are the alternatives for studios that these days are struggling to have examples of maybe what they could still do today before they decide to really give up. So I'm super pleased to have today Emma with me. And before we get started in the conversation, a quick intro. Emma Delage is the CEO of Studio Camelia, an independent game development studio based in Montpellier, France. I say it all in French accent, sorry for the listener. Established in 2022, and before she had 12 years of experience in the video games industry, expertise in marketing, production management, and strategic thinkings that we'll get into. And right now, Emma and her team are working on Azara Radiant Echoes, a turn-based role-playing game set in a Mediterranean-inspired fantasy world, developed in collaboration with Japanese authors. And we'll get into that to describe what is Studio Camelia about. But first, welcome, Emma, in this podcast today.
Hello, Sophie. Thank you so much for having me. I must say I'm a regular listener of your podcast, and it really is an honor to be here with you.
Thanks. It means a lot also to me. And it's funny because some of the listeners that have been inspired, probably taking a step forward as well in the entrepreneurial journey, are now appearing on the podcast. So I feel like it's really a nice cycle. And I hope it will inspire more to just think, why not me? And what do I need to get started? So talking about starting a studio, let's talk about what happened before you started Studio Camelia, and what was your experience before? What was the transition point before all that happened?
So before Studio Camelia, I was working in the video game industry. My previous work experience was at Plugin Digital, which is an independent publisher. Most of my career was spent at Ubisoft Paris, where I had several roles. The first one was community developer. So I used to do strategic planning for different communities on different Ubisoft games. Then I switched to producing on some more strategic role at the Paris studio at Ubisoft. So I dealt with co-development and outsourcing, with setting up a department in order to foster new IP creation at the studio. So it was super interesting. I worked on several Ubisoft brands, first the Rabbids, then Just Dance, and Ghost Recon. Also worked on Watch Dogs. So yeah, it was an experience that I cherish a lot.
Uh-huh. So it's been quite a big series of very well-known IPs, big brands, and more curious about your specific experience there. What was the part that maybe leads to what led to some initial idea with Studio Camelia? Was it more in marketing and launching those games, or understanding, what makes players tick or what creates a big brand?
So I would say what forged my vision at Ubisoft, at least, was how involved I was with working hand in hand with communities of players. I'm a gamer at heart, always played a lot of games, and always wanted to have this link with developers. And when I entered Ubisoft, I was able to create this bond between the community and the developers. And this is something that is really dear to me. But the idea of founding Studio Camelia at first comes from my own personal passion in gaming, which is JRPGs. So it stands for Japanese role-playing games. This is a kind of games that I discovered when I was a teenager. Before that, I used to play more arcade games, and my first true narrative game was Final Fantasy X. And it was at this time where you try to decide on what you want to be when you grow up. And I was like, wow, actually, there are people who are making these kind of games. I want to do that too. And I used to love everything related to Japan a lot. So I knew from my teenagehood that someday I would start my own studio and that this studio would be making JRPGs. So this was first a kind of passion project for me, but then I had an education in marketing, and during my career, I was able to develop it in kind of a strategic thinking. And so I tried to tie this passion for JRPG into, okay, does it make a sound market to be in and spend a lot of time and efforts in? And so the more I developed the vision around the studio, the more I grew convinced of that. Because JRPGs are really a genre that to me is a kind of overlooked because maybe of the J in front of it, it's like it's reserved only for Japanese developers. But I think it's kind of a misunderstanding because JRPG really defines a genre, and having this kind of passion for the genre helps me find all the pain points that the community would have about this genre and then define what we would be developing as Studio Camelia.
Okay, and then we are getting into maybe the genesis of even before the studio started. Sometimes we see success starting from niche, where what we call niche, where you have founders or creator having really in-depth insights, and that's why they can deliver something special in that segment because they have those unique insights. And so it sounds to me like you identified maybe some gaps or things that you could not play or couldn't see in the market with JRPG. And so I'm curious of what led to the conviction, like, okay, at that time, 2021, you take the leap and you start actually a studio around that. Was it a timing thing, coincidental, or you were to a point like, okay, we really need to build something there? Like, there's no other way.
So this conviction about the vision I had for the studio, I've had it for a while, but it was more a matter of now is the good time to do it because I feel ready. Like all the lights are green, basically, and I can go. Because like I said earlier, it's a childhood dream. So I always had this idea in the back of my mind where I was like, I want to start my own studio. When we were all in a lockdown during COVID, I spent all my free time designing what I would like to see for the studio, the values, the vision, and everything. But it's hard to really dedicate yourself to a startup when you are working full-time on your daily job at the same time. And my will to start my studio was more and more serious. And during COVID, with my partner, we decided that we were fed up with Paris. So we wanted to move back to the south of France. There in Montpellier, I joined Plugin Digital. And so for 6 months there, I worked in a marketing position. And every day, actually, I was talking with independent developers who dared create their own studio. And at some point, every day, the more I talked with them, the more I was like, wow, when is it my turn? When am I going to be able to do this? And so at some point, it became stronger than me. And I just went to my boss and said, I'm sorry, I really want to start my studio now. So can we end the contract? So yeah, I really wanted to try this new adventure because I felt it, that I couldn't wait any longer. My conviction to start the studio, thinking that it was a good idea to specialize the studio in JRPG was really about what I could observe as a player and talking with other community members about the evolution of the genre. Because, well, JRPGs, they're quite an old genre of games. They emerged in the 80s. At first, it was a kind of video game version of Dungeons and Dragons. So you had a kind of list of choices you could make, and then you would move in the adventure with a Japanese tilt to it. But yeah, it remained very heavily text-based. Turn-based was the favorite gameplay. And, with technology evolving and the companies that were making those games in the 80s, 90s growing as well, they had to reach a more mainstream market. And being mainstream means also going towards more action-oriented games. Whereas at the origin, this kind of games were more centered around strategic thinking. And this has an effect that it left aside a lot of players who grew up playing this kind of games. And so as a long-time player of this genre, I could see that. I could see the frustration growing among the players who are actually a bit older than the mainstream audience, which would be between, 14 to 25-year-old. So our core target is maybe more around 30 years old. And I think also it's a differentiating factor for us because we are capturing an audience that feels left behind. We are a team that plays the games we are making, that knows them very well, that knows, what the expectations are. And thanks to our size, because we're a team of 14 at the moment, we are capable of having the agility and also, making a game for a market that would be smaller than, big AAA mainstream audiences allows us to be more creative and to bring some freshness to the genre. So yeah, this is how we came up, with deciding on the creative vision for Alzara and what would our main target would be for this game.
All right. So before we get a bit more into the game, which is also quite interesting, like more from a marketing for me and like a product category point of view, the tricky question is always, okay, I want to start. How do I finance this? So you have to finance yourself, right? And when you say you are a team of 14 people, how do you fund that team? How do you pay that team? So it's been already 2-3 years. So I'm curious about the journey of funding and fundraising for you, how it started and where you are today.
Yeah. Well, we didn't start with 14 people from the beginning, for sure. At the beginning, it was only me. So being based in France, we have this advantage of having 2 years of unemployment compensation. And so when I left my job at Plugin Digital, I was eligible to this compensation that allowed me to get a revenue for a couple of years. And without that, I don't think I would have been able to take this leap of faith. So I wanted to make JRPGs, which is considered a bit like a niche market or at least a weeb kind of things to do. So it was hard to convince some former colleagues to leave their job to start this adventure with me. So I started alone. I was like, yeah, that's okay. I'm going to focus on doing market research and making sure that I nail really the pain points of the genre and find reasons and how we can solve them. Once I got that, I confirmed my hypothesis with a survey that I sent to several social medias and community groups like subreddits or Discord channels, that kind of stuff. And I was expecting maybe 100 answers and I would have been really happy with that. We got 13 times more than that.
Oh, wow.
We got more than 1,000 answers. So it made it a very accurate survey. And also it showed how engaged the community was and willing to see some new games in the genre. So lots of hypotheses were confirmed thanks to that. And so once I got this, since I cannot find people from my previous companies, I'm going to look in my community of fellow game developers who also happen to like JRPGs. And so I sent out messages in a bottle, basically, where I was saying, hey, I'm looking for a game designer. I'm looking for an art director. And I got some answers. I was able to interview several people who would then become my co-founders. So this was in summer 2021, beginning of fall 2021. And by the end of 2021, we were 4 co-founders. So there was a game designer, a programmer, and a narrative designer. And myself, I would have been in charge of everything related to business, marketing, and creative vision. And so the 4 of us, we started working on a prototype for Alzara that I pitched to some investors. And this point here was also very important because how do you find investors when you start from scratch? Because my experience was at Ubisoft. I did a bit of business development when I was there. I knew some indie developers, but I didn't know any investors. And actually, I feel really blessed because in the answers of my survey, I had one person who told me, hey, I know how it is to start your own company. I am a serial entrepreneur. If you want to have a chat with me, feel free to do so. Reach out to me to this address. So I was like, yeah, why not contacting this person? And so I got in touch with Eldin, who is an Australian serial startup who works in biomedicine. And, you know, he was a fellow JRPG fan. He gave me lots of advice on how to raise funds. And he told me, hey, you know what? Actually, I have a former colleague of mine who used to work in the gaming industry. I think now he's back in the industry. Do you want me to put you in touch with him? I said, yes, of course. And this person was actually Johannes Meng from Remedy. Before he was a former general manager of the studio. So I was like, what's happening there? So I had this call with Johannes. He was the first one I pitched my studio idea to. I was absolutely not prepared. Well, it was my first real pitch. But Johannes was really kind and comprehensive. And I think he liked my profile because he introduced me to some other investors. And you know how it goes. You pitch to more and more people who put you in touch with their network. And so our first funding came from several business angels who actually wanted to support diversity in gaming and to encourage women building their own game studio. And I feel very blessed because thanks to them, we then received the support from BPI French, which is a private/public investment bank in France. And from this amount of money we gathered, we were able to hire our first team members. We started putting everybody on a contract in September. And as for me, I kept this unemployment compensation up until April this year. And yes, from August to December, we recruited our core team members, worked on the vertical slice for our game. And then we went to several conventions like Gamescom, Tokyo Game Show, in order to pitch the project to some other business partners. And in 2023, the business angels that invested in the studio invested in the form of BSA Air. So it's an equivalent to safes. So we had to convert those safes into real actions, actual actions. So I wanted to close our pre-seed round, and I wanted to do it during 2023. But well, you know how the economy was in 2023. I think I talked with every gaming VCs and non-gaming VCs on this planet. I also pitched a lot of business angels, but the thing was that they were getting very picky into what kind of projects they would back. So we had the opportunity to sign with a lead investor. We got the promise, the LOI in June 2023. But the lead investor was asking us to find some additional investors. So during the summer, we went again on chasing after some of our business angels and investors. And in October, our lead investor told us that the momentum was gone, whereas we had found a follower investor. So yeah, from big promises of fundraising, we went back to only the business angels we managed to convince, the new ones. That's part of life. Things happen. You deal with the cards that you have in hand. And so we closed our pre-seed round with, well, the minimum amount that we needed. But then again, we needed to find some additional funds. And so we came up with the solution of building a Kickstarter campaign for Alzara. Because what we felt was that we were missing product market fit. Because it's a niche game, it's a niche genre, according to some people, even if I disagree. And people were hesitant because of the budget we asked for that. So we found that we needed to prove that there was an interest from the market in buying our project. And given how involved the community of JRPG players is, Kickstarter was, for us, like a no-brainer, because it would allow us to show the game to the players, to find their support, and to prove that, yes, there is a product market fit. And so this is where we are at the moment. We have a very successful Kickstarter that has reached 100,000 euros in 48 hours, thanks to a very well-planned marketing campaign with PR efforts and influencers.
Thanks for sharing that. I must say, quite a roller coaster journey, which is not, I would say, new news for any company these days. But we'll get back to the setup of a fundraising campaign, because there are maybe some learnings here for the listeners who are considering that path, the crowdfunding campaign. A lot of resilience, and it's important you mention it, even for, like, especially for you. Very inspiring mindset when you had nothing but yourself to start anyway. So this is where the conviction, back to the why are you building this, because most of the time things will not happen according to what you planned. So you need to remember why you're on this journey. And if it's, just for a destination, it's a very tough one. So I remember from what you shared, okay, that doesn't work to attract employees from safe companies. Indeed, it doesn't. But then going out there, talking, meeting new people, getting into places to get known, I think this is a very strong takeaway and it's very entrepreneurial in that sense. You create the opportunities. So you went on channels to connect with developer communities. And even when you were doing market research, you went really deep into the channels to get some traction. Or when you started to talk to an investor, but you didn't know anybody, which I'm sure people listening here can probably find themselves in that case. It's a very exemplary story where, you start somewhere, you talk to people, you knock at several doors, and, by the number, there's a door opening several doors. So that's what I take away from what you shared. And I would say your approach is not taking the no and try as many doors as possible until you really have tried all the doors possible. And then, okay, then it's a real no, but it didn't seem to stop you. Does that resonate with you as a summary, a bit of what you shared?
Yes, definitely. I was really convinced of my vision, and I always had in mind, okay, so if that doesn't work, then I will switch to 10B, which is, reaching out to another investor. And then, I also used my network in order to find some intros, and the support of my initial business angels was royal as well. So yeah, I am convinced that, it's going to sound very cheesy, but the world needs more JRPGs. Mm-hmm. I am reading messages from communities of players who are so happy to see a new studio like ours. And in terms of recruitment, so the communities of players love what you do, but, video game developers also love JRPGs. So every time we recruit, we get such messages of love and support, and people who want to join us. Like, just to give you an example, we wanted to recruit a game designer for the studio, and we got more than 700 applications.
Really?
For the role. Yes.
Oh, wow.
So we're a small team. I am the one who is dealing with all the recruitment for the game designers. And there is the studio reputation. There is the fact that we are working on the JRPG, which is definitely a love factor. There is the values of the company as well. This attracts people. And the fact that we are a remote-friendly environment as well, so work conditions also attract lots of incredible profiles.
Wow, that's very inspiring. And I can tell you, for 700 applications, this is a number that I know many companies would dream of, having worked in big companies where sometimes it was the opposite way, struggling to even have applications. So something you can, give yourself credit for. It is a very good sign of traction. You create something that resonate with professionals and also an audience. So let's move forward before getting more into the company and maybe some aspects of the games. I think here, building a crowdfunding campaign, my God, when you open the page and you see all the work you need to do, it's quite overwhelming. So for a noob, any noob listening, starting a crowdfunding campaign, Who does that? Did you get a marketing person? Did you learn? Did you try? What was the approach?
So running a Kickstarter campaign was an option that we had in mind maybe from the beginning because, like I was saying earlier, JRPGs on Kickstarter do very well. So we kept it as an option, all the more as I wanted to have this bond with communities. So at some point, it would have made sense to run a Kickstarter campaign. I think for somebody who is a beginner in this field, well, first thing is to read as much documentation as you can to surround yourself with experts. On our end, we are working with ICO partners on the Kickstarter campaign for the PR and many other stuff. But yeah, you can document yourself. There's a lot of postmortems, of GDC conferences about running your Kickstarter campaign. Kickstarter's website is quite well done as well. So I would say get as much information as you can. And not all games are a good fit for Kickstarter. So you need to do some benchmark as well to see if your product can resonate with this specific audience, because the audience on Kickstarter is not like your overall main audience for your game. It's a very specific target. For instance, mobile games don't do really well on Kickstarter from what I saw. So you need to see, okay, is my game a fit for Kickstarter first? Then yes, indeed, it really feels like launching your game because you have to produce a trailer, you have to produce all the PR assets that go with it, all the social media elements, you have to plan a communication plan. So it's a very intense marketing effort for 30 days at least. And so you have to plan way in advance to think about any possibilities that could happen. For instance, there is something that is quite popular on Kickstarter, which is the stretch goals, So once you reach the funding goal for your campaign, you can open some additional goals saying, hey, if you bring more money, you're going to unlock this new feature in the game, this new character, this kind of stuff. And sometimes things don't go as you would expect, even slower or even faster. So always have a plan B or C or D in mind because anything can happen. And really be prepared for receiving lots of love. In our case, like we were really overwhelmed with player feedback. On the D-Day when we launched the campaign, like nobody in the team was working because we were all pressing refresh on the button because the numbers were growing so rapidly. We were like, what's happening? We got more than 300 people rushing on our Discord server saying, I backed this game. And, Colin, our community developer, was overwhelmed. I was like, wow, this is huge. Like, we got so many game outlets that wrote articles about the project. So something is happening and it really feels like a launch. And yeah, you need to be really mentally prepared. And also in terms of organizing the campaign, you need to think about every possible option. There is some good stuff, though. The Kickstarter team is here to advise you, and I strongly encourage you try to reach out to them. And, well, talking with some other devs who have run a campaign, like I think those in this industry, people are quite accessible. So in our case, for instance, I reached out to Sabotage, who is the studio that made Sea of Stars, another JRPG that also had their Kickstarter campaign. So I reached out to them for advice. And so they gave me a lot of hints on what we could improve on the campaign page and all. It's definitely like preparing for a launch.
Mm-hmm. Those are very useful tips. Thanks for sharing, like dropping also some names and partners to prepare yourself. But yeah, it seems like almost like a project in itself where you prepare your strategy to launch a game, but your campaign, right? So the product is the campaign.
Definitely. The product is a campaign and you need to plan that in your production plan because it took some time to the team to produce all the assets for the marketing campaign. And when you are doing that, well, the game itself is a bit like on pause because, well, all your team's efforts are focused on making the best campaign possible.
Tell us more a bit about the team and how you've envisioned the values. You mentioned briefly about it and what led to so many designers excited in joining you.
So when I thought about the vision for the studio, I quickly realized that I could do anything I wanted actually with the company because there was no limit. I was like, there is no way I'm going to reproduce some work conditions that I had in the past. For me, it was unthinkable to think the studio with crunch or overtime or, having management practices that push people to burn out, that kind of stuff. Like, this was out of the way. So I wanted to have a studio that would reflect my values and to bring people that would share those values. So there is one value that is really key for me, which is kindness and empathy. In French, we say bienveillance. I'm not sure there is an equivalent in English. But it's really, making sure that the environment is safe and that people are respected and that we listen to them and that, actions are taken so that people feel their best at just, making what they love. There is also putting people first. So it works in both senses, both directions, actually. So people like the development team, but also our players. So this explains the marketing-driven approach that we have when designing our game. And the last one, well, being a woman in the industry, diversity and inclusion is something very dear to me. And so those three core values are really shaping the way the company is working. And so when we think about some elements that we could put in place within the studio, we always reflect based on those values.
It's very inspiring, and I can relate to, when building your own studio, you don't have to live by legacies of values. You're, wow, I can create values. I really believe it. Because at the end of the day, values are the reflection of who we are. So the founders, the CEOs, the directors of the studio. And so it's better to write down something that you actually live by and believe in. Otherwise, it's kind of fake, right? So, and also that's the opportunity is questioning the ways of working that maybe hasn't worked for you and trying something different. Therefore, great example to see different studios and company runs differently because we have different directors. In the end, this is your truth and it has a place to be. And there is not one way of a company to be run. And so far, it has led you to where you are today with all the following. So that's great to hear those examples of values. Again, I spent quite some time on culture. That's why for me, it is so personal to founders that the best work is to get to the depth of what you believe in. There's no better values than others, but they have to be true to the founders. Let's wrap up on some reflection point because it's been a journey of 3 years and you've already shared quite some part around the fundraising journey. You've been on that entrepreneurial journey where many things didn't happen according to plan, like even at worst times. And when was those pivotal moments where, you feel so low and then you say, okay, that's it, I quit. And then what are the tools you found to keep going? And then say, okay, no, this is the right thing. I'll keep knocking on the doors, like at those different moments exactly when your whole building strategy around the fundraising in 2023 just collapsed and then you kept moving. I'd love to hear more, like what happened there for you?
I think I never thought once, that's it, I'm giving you. Never. Really, I never had this in mind. I was like, okay, this doesn't work. Okay, plan B. I always have several options in my mind in order to reach our objective. Maybe a couple moments where I didn't listen to my gut feeling and I paid it. Definitely. Like maybe not recruiting the best person for the job and you knew it from the beginning. And then you have to deal with what happens when somebody is not the best person for the role. There is also the weight of uncertainty, which is very intense sometimes. And, I never thought I'm going to give up, but I have some very down moments where I was like, this is too much to handle. And I talked with some fellow entrepreneurs. So surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals, people who've been in the same situation as you were, being able to talk with your investors, to ask them for their feedback, what you would do in that situation, and listening to many opinions, where in the end you will have to make your decision for yourself, really helps alleviate this weight of uncertainty that could really drive you mad if you listen to it too much. Another thing that I wish I knew was networking is so important when you are raising funds. You need to look familiar to the people you're pitching to. And well, sometimes it's not easy because you're new to this area of the video game industry. The investors, they know each other a lot. They talk about the project they've seen a lot, but you are new to this environment. And so how do you look and sound familiar when you don't know what the person in front of you is expecting? I spent a lot of time trying to guess, okay, so if they're asking this question, this is what they're actually looking for in terms of answer. And so the more you do it, you get the knack of it, and so it becomes better. But I think at the beginning, I lost a bit of time trying to understand what people were actually asking when they were asking this kind of question.
That's very helpful, actually. The networking, I have heard that from other founders, like underestimating. And I see, especially for women building companies, heads down, in the product. But it's so important networking because it shortcuts the whole process for you to get to the answer that you're looking for when you don't even know where to look, right? So, and you gave multiple examples where the network was actually saving a lot of time to get to the next step and to the solution. So yes, investing in networking, although it's not the intuitive place to spend time at the beginning, especially as a CEO and game builder. I know that pain, but it's always a balance to find where you invest a little bit here and then back to the product and the team and so on.
Yeah. And on that, I'd like to add that, especially as a woman, I don't know if it's a common trait, but there is a lot of sometimes a feeling of deserving to be recognized for what you are doing because you did everything right and you don't see why people wouldn't reach out to you or care about you or give feedback to you. Whereas just, sometimes it's just about daring to reach out to someone without expecting them to hear about you and all about the good things. And it's not only about giving the right answers, but it's more about giving the answers people want to hear. And I think there is this shift in terms of mindset that as women, we need to understand is that we definitely have the right answers because we thought about this so much, but it's how you show them, it's how you present yourself in front of the people you're in touch with. And this is super important.
Yes. You work with a perception of yourself, and also it's very dependent on who's in front of you, right? Therefore, also the challenge when you're the minority and then you're perceived not in the correct way of what you actually want to convey.
Exactly.
Let's wrap up. It's so much like a deep topic on itself. So I feel the pain, Emma, because I know too much of it, having had plenty of conversation around that, talking to also female founders, especially. But ending on the note of optimism, what are you looking forward to in the coming weeks?
Well, I'm looking forward to the end of our campaign. Mm-hmm. We're getting closer. I'm looking forward to being able to share with our business partners the next playable that we are currently working on. I'm looking forward to seeing more and more feedback from the community of players that we've gathered, seeing some love from them. We've already seen some fan art, some testimonials of appreciations. I want to see more of that. I want to see our players, playing our game and making them happy because, well, in the end, to me, if I'm here on this planet, it's to bring joy to the world. And, well, I think we're on a good way for our game.
That's very inspiring. I can totally feel your energy and your commitment to it, with a smile on your face that people can't see by listening to the episode, but I see it. And I'll make sure to put the link, to your game, to a Kickstarter, so people can follow the progress of Alzara and its launch. Good luck with the Kickstarter and the next steps. And again, big credits to you and the team.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time.